Las Vegas. The name alone conjures images of glittering lights, neon signs, and the constant hum of excitement. It's a place where the night never ends, where fortunes are made and lost in the blink of an eye, and where everything seems possible, even the impossible. Yet, for all its dazzling allure, there's a darker side to this city, one hidden far from the bright lights of the Strip, a side of Las Vegas where secrets are buried in the shadows and where the true horrors of the city come to life in the most unexpected places. I never expected to find myself in one of these forgotten corners of the city. It was late, around 2 a.m. to be exact. The excitement of the night had finally worn off, and most of the streets had quieted down. The usual hustle and bustle of tourists and gamblers had faded, leaving behind a strange silence that hung heavy in the air. I had been wandering for a while, trying to make my way back to my hotel after a few too many drinks and a little too much gambling. The neon lights from the casinos in the distance flickered like distant stars, casting an eerie glow over the cracked pavement beneath my feet. I had taken a wrong turn somewhere, and before I knew it, I found myself in a part of the city I didn't recognize. The streets here were different, older, less polished. The signs on the buildings were faded, their colors worn and peeling. I could feel the weight of the city's history in the air, like I thought about turning back, but I didn't. Something about the place intrigued me, like there was a story hidden in the corners of this forgotten part of Las Vegas. A story waiting to be uncovered. But the longer I walked, the more I realized that I should have turned around when I had the chance. As I walked, I noticed that the neon lights didn't seem quite right. They flickered in a way that was almost unnatural, casting long, twisting shadows on the pavement that seemed to move on their own, like the darkness was alive. The lights were bright enough to make the alleyways visible, but not bright enough to make them feel safe. It was as though the darkness was creeping in, trying to swallow up everything in its path. And that's when I heard it. A faint whisper, almost inaudible, coming from the shadows of the alley to my left. At first, I thought it was just the wind, the usual sounds of a late-night city mixed with the hum of the neon lights. But as I stopped and listened, the whisper grew clearer. It was soft, almost like a breath, but it had a strange, compelling quality to it. Come closer. The voice seemed to echo in my mind, pulling me toward the alley. For a moment, I stood frozen, uncertain of what to do. I had always heard the stories about the darker side of Vegas, people getting lost in the wrong places, vanishing without a trace. The voice had an unsettling calm to it, like it knew exactly what it was doing. Part of me wanted to turn and run, but another part, the part that had been looking for something to break, I stepped toward the alley, my feet hesitant at first, but then more determined as the strange pull of the whisper took hold. With every step I took, the air grew colder. It wasn't the kind of cold you'd expect on a warm Vegas night. It was a deep, biting cold that seemed to come from nowhere. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, but it didn't help. The cold felt like it was coming from inside me, spreading outward like a chill that reached into my bones. By the time I reached the mouth of the alley, my breath was coming out in misty puffs. Despite the warm evening air, the world around me seemed to grow quieter, as though the very city was holding its breath. The shadows in the alley shifted, stretching out and twisting as if they were alive, moving in ways that shouldn't have been possible. My heart was pounding in my chest, but my legs kept moving forward. The whisper was louder now, more distinct, and yet it still had that eerie quality to it. It wasn't a voice that belonged to anyone or anything I knew. It sounded ancient, like a voice that had been around far longer than the city itself. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like I had to follow it. It was as if the voice knew something about me, something I didn't even understand yet. And for reasons I couldn't comprehend, I needed to hear it. When I took the last few steps into the alley, the world around me seemed to shift. The neon lights from the street behind me dimmed, casting the alley into total darkness. The air was thick now, heavy with a sense of something watching me, something lurking just beyond my reach. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, a presence, like something was waiting for me to make the wrong move. And then it happened. The whisper changed. It was no longer soft and inviting. It became deep, dark, and gravelly, like a voice that had spent too long in the shadows. It echoed in my head, vibrating through my skull. "You've just entered the devil's game." The words sent a shiver down my spine. I froze, my mind racing, trying to process what had just happened. I spun around, expecting to see someone standing behind me, someone playing a cruel prank. But the alley was empty. No one was there. The street was quiet, and the only sound was the faint rustling of trash in the wind. I took a step back, my heart racing. The voice had been real, too real. But there was no one here, no one to see, no one to speak. I glanced over my shoulder once more, half expecting to see the shadows move, but they remained still. The alley was dead silent now, as though the voice had never spoken at all. I didn't know what to think. Was I imagining things? Had I been so tired from wandering around that I had started hallucinating? But deep down, I knew it wasn't that. The voice was real, and whatever it had said, the devil's game, was real too. I stood there for a moment longer, the silence pressing in around me like a weight. I could feel the air getting colder again, and I knew it was time to leave. Something wasn't right about this place, about this city, and I had the sinking feeling that I had just uncovered something I wasn't supposed to find. I turned and walked away from the alley, my heart still pounding in my chest. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. I glanced over my shoulder one last time, but the alley was empty, just as it had been before. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the game had. The next night, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. It had been just one night since I walked through that dark alley, heard that voice whisper my name, and felt something colder than the Vegas air settling into my bones. But it wasn't just the night that haunted me. It was the voice. It lingered in the back of my mind, a constant echo, growing louder as I tried to forget it. The devil's game kept replaying in my head, over and over, like a broken record. It felt real, far too real for something that could have been a mere trick of the mind. I had to go back. Maybe, just maybe, it was all a nightmare. Maybe I could prove that it was just my imagination, running wild after a long night. I grabbed my jacket and stepped out of the hotel room, the cold air hitting my face as soon as I opened the door. The streets of Vegas were quieter this time, almost as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. I knew I shouldn't go back to that alley, but I couldn't help myself. There was something pulling me toward it, an invisible force that refused to let me forget. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, just a fluke of the night. A combination of too many lights, too many drinks, too many things that didn't make sense. But the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger the pull became. I walked through the quiet streets, passing the gleaming neon signs that flashed their promises of wealth and pleasure. But none of it felt real anymore. The allure of the strip faded away as I ventured deeper into the older parts of the city. The familiar glitter of the casinos and bars disappeared, replaced by aging buildings with cracked windows and graffiti-tagged walls. The night was silent, the city almost like a ghost town, with only the hum of distant traffic keeping me company. I walked faster, but I wasn't sure if I was walking toward something or away from it. When I reached the alley again, I hesitated. The faint glow of the neon lights bounced off the dirty, peeling walls, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out toward me. I stood at the entrance of the alley for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I told myself to turn around, to walk away before I got any deeper into whatever this was. But something was different now. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if the city was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. There was no turning back. I stepped forward. The alley was darker than I remembered, the shadows swallowing up everything but the flickering neon signs above. It smelled like wet concrete and decay, the stench of a place forgotten by time. I could hear the distant sounds of traffic, but it felt like the alley was a world of its own, isolated from the rest of Vegas. My footsteps echoed in the silence as I walked deeper into the narrow space, the cold creeping up my spine as I moved further away from the light. Then I saw him. At the end of the alley, standing perfectly still, was a man in a black suit. His figure was almost swallowed by the darkness, but there was something about him that stood out, something that made my blood run cold. I couldn't make out his face. His features were hidden in shadow, as if the night itself had consumed him. But it was his eyes that caught me. Bright, red eyes that gleamed in the darkness, burning like twin embers. They pierced through the shadows, locking onto mine, and I felt a chill run down my spine. It was like he was watching me, waiting for me. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to look away. The man didn't speak, didn't even flinch. He just stood there, his gaze fixed on me, almost like he was sizing me up, like he knew something I didn't. A strange sense of dread washed over me, like I had just stumbled into something far beyond my understanding. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to run as fast as I could, but my feet felt like they were glued to the ground. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The man's eyes held me in place, like some kind of invisible force was keeping me rooted to the spot. After what felt like an eternity, he took a step forward, then another. Each step was slow, deliberate, as though he were testing the air, sensing my fear. I wanted to step back, to put some distance between us, but my body wouldn't respond. It was as if my legs had turned to stone, like I was trapped in a nightmare, unable to escape. The man took another step closer, and I could feel his presence growing heavier, pressing in on me like a physical weight. There was something wrong about him, something that didn't belong in this world. He seemed to have stepped out of a place far darker than Vegas, like he wasn't human at all. The closer he got, the colder it became, the chill seeping into my bones. It wasn't just the temperature. It was something deeper, something unnatural. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, smooth like honey, dripping from his lips. But it was dark, heavy, like it carried 1,000 secrets with it. Everyone who comes here is part of the game, he said. His words felt like a heavy stone, dropping into the silence, breaking the tension that had built between us. I wanted to say something, to ask what gain he was talking about, what he meant, but I couldn't. His voice seemed to steal the words from my mouth. It was like I wasn't supposed to understand, like the answer was something I wasn't ready to hear. My heart raced, my thoughts a jumble of confusion and fear, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from him. The man in the black suit took another step forward, and I could feel the air grow heavier, thicker. With each movement, I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. And then, as suddenly as he had appeared, the ground beneath me began to tremble. It wasn't a shake or a rumble. It was a deep, powerful vibration, like something was stirring beneath the earth, awakening from a long slumber. The ground beneath my feet shifted, and the air became charged, electric, as if the city itself had come alive in that moment. I staggered back, my heart racing, my mind spinning. The man in the black suit didn't move. He stood there, his red eyes never leaving mine, as if nothing had changed. Then, without warning, he was gone, vanished into the night, like he had never been there at all. I stood in the middle of the alley, the tremors still pulsing beneath my feet, and I realized I wasn't alone anymore. The man in the black suit was gone, but something had changed. Something was different now. It wasn't just the alley or the city. It was me. I had crossed into something darker, something I couldn't explain, and I had a feeling I wasn't going to like what came next. The game had begun, and I had already made my first move.
The night had been restless. I tossed and turned, unable to find a single moment of peace. The words the man in the black suit had spoken echoed through my mind relentlessly, like a haunting refrain I couldn't escape. The game. What game was he talking about? Why did it feel like I had just stumbled into something that had been waiting for me all along? A part of me wanted to dismiss it, to tell myself it was nothing more than a bad dream or a trick of the mind. But deep down, I knew that something much darker was at play. And it wasn't going to let me go that easily. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't just dealing with a random encounter in the streets of Vegas. There was a reason I had ended up in that alley. There was a reason I had heard that voice. Something had drawn me there. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was the city itself. But I was now tangled in something much bigger than I had ever imagined. And the next morning, I went through the motions of a normal day, but my mind kept drifting back to the man in the suit, his glowing red eyes, and the unsettling words he had spoken. I couldn't focus on anything. I could barely even stomach the thought of breakfast. I needed to find answers. I needed to understand what this was. What kind of game I had just been pulled into. As the sun began to set, casting its golden light over the city, I decided to take a walk. The streets of Vegas were alive with their usual energy. People laughing, music blasting from nearby clubs, and the sound of slot machines ringing out in the distance. But the excitement around me felt distant, like I was observing it all from behind a glass. I couldn't shake the sense of unease that clung to me like a shadow. That's when I heard the rumors. I was sitting in a small cafe near Fremont Street, nursing a cup of coffee, when I overheard two men at a nearby table talking in hushed voices. They were speaking about a place, a secret place, known only to a few. They called it the Devil's Table. I leaned in slightly, trying to catch more of the conversation, but they spoke too quietly for me to hear every word. However, I caught enough to know that this was no ordinary casino. The men described it as a hidden, underground gambling den, located deep in the heart of Vegas's oldest district, far away from the bright lights and the glamour of the Strip, a place where the stakes were far higher than money, a place where people didn't just gamble with chips and cash, they gambled with their very souls. Some said it was the oldest casino in Vegas, a relic of the city's darker days, and that those who had entered it had either walked away richer than kings or lost everything, including their lives. Some whispered that those who were unlucky enough to lose at the Devil's Table never left the casino. They disappeared, swallowed by the dark corners of the city. No one knew exactly where it was, but those who had found it once, they said, could never forget its location. It was a place where luck didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the price you were willing to pay. The words sent a chill down my spine. It was too much of a coincidence. This was the game. This was what the man in the black suit had meant. I knew then that I had no choice. I had to go there.
I had to see it for myself. Part of me wanted to back out, to walk away from it all. But a stronger part, the part that had been drawn to that alley, to the voice in the shadows, refused to let me turn back now. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The game had already started. And there was no way to unplay it. That night, I ventured into the heart of the oldest district of Vegas, far from the Strip's bright lights and flashy casinos. The streets were quieter here, the buildings older and worn down, as if the years had left their mark on the place. The alleys were dark, and the air smelled of mildew and decay. I walked for what felt like an eternity, guided only by the faint whispers of the rumors I had overheard. It didn't take long for me to realize I was lost. But then, just as I was about to turn back, I saw it. The door was hidden behind a crumbling building, half obscured by vines and grime. It looked like it had been there for centuries, rusted and forgotten by time. The kind of door you would never notice unless you were looking for it, unless you were meant to find it. I felt a strange compulsion to approach. My heart was hammering in my chest, my palms sweating as I reached out to touch the handle. The metal was cold, almost freezing to the touch. As I pushed the door open, a cloud of smoke rolled out, thick and heavy, wrapping itself around me like a shroud. The air inside was stale, suffocating, and for a moment, I hesitated. But something inside me told me I had already come too far to turn back now. I stepped inside. The room was dimly lit. The flickering glow of candlelight casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the scent of tobacco and something else. Something metallic, like blood. There were no windows, no signs, just rows of tables covered with worn velvet cloths. The sound of soft murmurs and the clinking of chips echoed in the distance. The patrons, seated at the tables. In the center of the room, there was a large, circular table, its surface gleaming under the soft light. The dealer stood behind it, a man with pale skin and cold, dark eyes that seemed to bore into me. He was dressed in a black suit, just like the man from the alley, his features smooth and featureless. His smile was wide, too wide, and it didn't reach his eyes. His gaze never wavered as he studied me, as if he already knew what I had come for. "Are you here to play?" he asked, his voice sending a chill down my spine. His voice, smooth, like velvet, but with an edge to it that made my skin crawl. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. I nodded, though my mouth was dry, and my heart was thumping so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "I'm here to win." The dealer's smile stretched even wider, his teeth unnaturally white in the dim light. Everyone thinks that," he said, his voice almost a whisper now. "But the question isn't whether—"
He motioned toward the table. The room grew colder, the shadows deeper. I felt as if the walls were closing in on me. This was it. The moment had come. Whatever this game was, it wasn't just a simple bet. It wasn't just chips and cards. I could feel it in the air, a tension so thick it made it hard to breathe. The devil's table wasn't a place for luck. It was a place where deals were made, where the stakes were higher than anyone could imagine. And I had already made my choice. I took a deep breath and walked toward the table. The sound of my footsteps muffled by the heavy air. As I sat down, the dealer's gaze never left me. The game was about to begin. But one question lingered in my mind. One question that I knew. The table was set. A single roll of the dice would begin the game. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I sat across from the dealer, his cold, unblinking eyes never leaving mine. The air in the room had shifted. The smoke seemed thicker, more oppressive, curling around the edges of the table like a living thing. I knew then that this was no ordinary game. The weight of the room, the heavy tension in the air, it all felt like something far darker than I had imagined. A dealer's smile never faltered as he placed the dice in front of me. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a smile that sent a chill crawling up my spine. His pale fingers tapped the edge of the table lightly, as if he were waiting for me to make the first move. I looked down at the dice, their surfaces gleaming under the dim light. They looked like ordinary dice, 6 sides marked with pips, but I knew better. There was nothing ordinary about them. They had already begun to feel like a weight I couldn't escape. I took a breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Roll the dice," the dealer said, his voice smooth, almost coaxing. "Let the game begin." Without another word, I reached for the dice, feeling their cool weight in my palm. As my fingers closed around them, a jolt of electricity shot through my arm. It wasn't physical, but it felt real, like something deep inside me had been awakened, stirred by the touch of those dice. My heart skipped a beat, but I forced myself to steady my breathing. There was no turning back now. I rolled the dice. They tumbled across the table, their edges clicking against the surface before they came to a stop. The room held its breath. I leaned forward, eyes locked on the dice, waiting to see what fate had in store. But what I saw wasn't just a roll. It was something much worse. The dice hadn't landed in a way that I could recognize. Each number was out of place, jumbled and distorted, as if the game itself. For a moment, nothing happened. The dealer's eyes never left me, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a low rumble seemed to vibrate through the table. I felt it in my chest, a strange pressure building in the air around me, as if the very room were holding its breath. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the sensation vanished, replaced by an overwhelming sense of unease. The dealer's lips curled into a twisted smile. "You've made your first move," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "But it's just the beginning." He reached into the center of the table and grabbed a handful of chips, dropping them onto the table with a sharp clink. "You've lost a few dollars," he continued, "but you've gained something more." I felt a strange shiver run down my spine, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The air felt charged, like something invisible was tugging at me, pulling me deeper into the game. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I had already crossed a line. There was no turning back now. The dice sat there, waiting for me to roll again. The tension in the air was almost unbearable, like a live wire humming with energy. I felt my hand shake as I reached for the dice once more. But this time, when my fingers brushed the cool surface, something felt different. Something had changed inside me. I took another roll. The dice spun across the table again, but this time, as they tumbled, a strange sensation washed over me, like I was no longer just a spectator, like I was becoming part of the game itself. My heartbeat quickened, and the world around me seemed to blur. The lights above the dice came to a stop, but this time, something was different. There was no sound of the dice settling, no satisfying click of the numbers falling into place. Instead, there was only silence, a suffocating silence that pressed in on me from all sides. The dealer's grin widened, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "Now you understand," he said, his voice soft but laced with an unmistakable satisfaction. "The game doesn't just take your money. It takes more than that. With every roll, with every decision, it demands something else from you." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, my pulse racing. "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. The dealer's smile faded, and his eyes darkened. "Your soul," he said, his voice like a snake's hiss. "Every time you play, a little piece of you slips away. It's not just about the money. Not anymore. The game takes what it wants,
And once you're in, there's no way out.
A chill ran down my spine, and I suddenly felt the weight of his words settle on me. It was like a cold hand gripping my chest, squeezing tighter with every breath I took. I'd known the stakes were high, but this was something else. This wasn't just a game for money. This was a game for my very essence. The room seemed to close in on me, the air growing colder, thicker. I could feel my heart racing, pounding in my chest as I tried to make sense of what was happening. The dealer's voice grew softer, almost as if he were enjoying my confusion, my fear. "Do you understand now?" he asked, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "There's no way out. Once you're in for good." I stared at him, my mind spinning. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to accept what he was saying. But deep down, the lights above flickered again, and this time, the sensation of the game's hold on me was undeniable. It was like the walls themselves were pressing in, the weight of the room pressing down on me with every second that passed. I couldn't breathe. My heart raced faster than it had ever gone before. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating, like the game itself was closing in, trapping me. The dealer's eyes never left me. He watched me closely, his smile twisted with something far darker than amusement. "It's only the beginning," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper now. "The game always takes more. The more you play, the more you lose." I could feel it, feel the game drawing me in further, with each roll of the dice. There was no escape, no way out. I had already given so much of myself just by sitting at the table. All I knew was that I had to keep playing. The stakes were too high, and there was no way to stop now. The game continued, each roll of the dice dragging me further into its twisted grip. The air in the room felt denser with every passing moment, suffocating in a way that made it hard to think, hard to breathe. The dealer stood there, watching with an unsettling calmness, his eyes gleaming with an almost predatory satisfaction as the game unfolded. The others at the table had long since ceased to look human in the way I had once understood them. Their faces were masks of desperation, eyes wide with fear, or hollow with the emptiness that came from losing everything. Everything except their souls. I glanced around, trying to focus on anything that would help me make sense of the madness unfolding in front of me. But there was nothing normal about this place. The casino had disappeared, replaced by a dark, oppressive atmosphere that weighed heavily on my chest. The table before me had transformed into a pit, an abyss. The man sitting next to me, who had been quietly fidgeting with his chips, suddenly let out a blood-curdling scream that shattered the silence of the room. His hands were no longer human. His fingers had transformed into twisted, claw-like appendages that dug into the table, scratching at the wood as though they were trying to escape. His face contorted in agony, his eyes wide with terror as he screamed again, this time the sound a rasping, guttural cry that sent a chill through my spine. In that instant, I could feel something deep within me, something primal, welling up. An overwhelming sense of dread and disbelief. I watched in frozen horror as his body began to writhe, twisting in ways that no human body should be able to move. His limbs bent at unnatural angles, his back arching as if he were a marionette being jerked by invisible strings. The horrific sight was so surreal that I couldn't tear my eyes away, and yet I knew deep down that I should. I could feel the bile rising in my throat, the urge to flee, but my legs refused to move. The man's screams grew louder, more desperate, as though he was fighting against something unseen, something that was consuming him from the inside out. But then, just as quickly as it had all started, it stopped. The man's body jerked. I blinked, my mind racing to process what I had just witnessed. But no one else at the table seemed fazed. The dealer's expression remained unchanged, his smile still twisted in that unnerving way. The other players who had been staring at the scene in front of them now looked back down at the table, as if nothing had happened, as if this was just part of the game. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't a game of chance. It wasn't about rolling the dice and hoping for the best. It was a game of survival. A game where you didn't just gamble with money. You gambled with everything that made you who you were. Your life, your soul, your very essence. There were no winners here. Only the ones who managed to hold on to their sanity, who didn't lose themselves completely in the process. I felt the weight of the truth settle heavily in my chest. My fingers tightened around the dice in front of me, the cool surfaces cold against my skin. The game had taken something from me already, something I wasn't sure I could get back. My breath was shallow, my vision swimming, the room tilting, as though I were spinning on the edge of a dizzying abyss. My mind raced, but I couldn't make sense of what was happening to me. I had started this with a sense of curiosity, a need to understand what the man in the black suit had meant when he spoke of the devil's game. But now, as I sat there at the table, feeling the weight
of every roll, every move, I realized that I had made a grave mistake. The stakes were far higher than I had ever imagined. The price of winning was not just money. It was something deeper. It was a piece of me that I could never get back. As the dice slid across the table once more, I could feel the pull of the game intensify. It wasn't just the pressure to win. It was the pressure to survive. Every roll felt like it was tearing something from me, stripping away my sense of self, bit by bit. Each number that landed on the table seemed to mock me, as if fate itself was laughing at my weakness. I glanced around the table again, my gaze locking with the other players. Their faces were like masks of despair. Their eyes, dark and hollow, staring at nothing. They had given up long ago, resigned to their fate. They knew they were trapped, just like me. There was no escape from this, no way out. The dealer had said it from the very beginning. Once you're in for good. The game had no mercy, no compassion. The dealer's voice broke through my thoughts, low and smooth, as if he could read my mind. "You're doing well," he said, his grin widening, though there was no warmth in it, but the game always takes more. His words echoed in my mind, over and over, each one sinking into my skin like a needle. The room felt colder, the air thick with the weight of his words. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the noise deafening in my ears. I wanted to stop. I wanted to walk away, to tear myself free from this nightmare. But I couldn't. The dice sat before me, waiting for me to roll again. And deep down, I knew I had no choice. I had to win. I had to keep playing, because if I stopped now, I would lose everything. Everything that was left of me. But what was the point of winning if there was nothing left to win? As my hand hovered over the dice, I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. The room tilted and my vision blurred. My body felt heavy, as though the weight of the game itself was pressing down on me, pushing me closer to the edge. I could feel something inside me slipping away, some part of my soul being drained with every passing second. And yet, I couldn't stop. The dice called to me. They promised me victory, but at what cost? What would I have left when it was all over? I picked up the dice, my fingers trembling as I held them, the cold surfaces biting into my skin. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, and then I let them fall. They tumbled across the table, bouncing once before coming to a stop. The dealer's eyes gleamed in the dim light as he leaned forward, watching me closely. "One more roll," he said, his voice like velvet.
smooth but laced with something darker. I looked at the dice, my heart sinking. Was I close to winning? Or was I just one step closer to losing everything? It didn't matter. The game would take what it wanted, and I would have to keep playing, no matter what. I had no choice. The weight of everything, the tension, the fear, the madness pressed down on me, and I knew it was time to make my final move. I reached for the dice, my fingers numb with the cold sweat that had long since soaked through my clothes. I had been playing for what felt like hours, but I knew deep down that the true game was only just beginning. Every roll, every round had been leading up to this moment. I could feel the pressure building inside me, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into the abyss. A dealer stood silently across from me, his eyes gleaming with something I couldn't quite name, but I knew it wasn't good. There was a strange satisfaction in his expression, as if he knew exactly how this would play out. His smile never wavered, but there was something in the way he watched me that made my stomach churn. He had known all along that I would get to this point, that I would come to this final moment. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about the price I would pay for playing the game at all. The dice sat in front of me, cold and lifeless, waiting for me to roll them, but I could still see the glint of the dice in my hand. The silence stretched on, longer than I thought possible, before I tossed them onto the table. The dice danced across the surface, like they had a mind of their own, spinning, tumbling, and twisting in ways that defied logic. It was as if they were alive, mocking me, taunting me with the unpredictability of what was to come. My heart raced as I watched them, helpless to do anything but wait. Time slowed down, the sound of the dice clattering against the table, echoing in my ears. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my hands shaking as I gripped the edge of the table. Then, at last, the dice stopped. The room was completely silent now. No voices, no sounds, just the heavy stillness pressing in from all sides. I leaned forward, my eyes fixed on the numbers that had landed before me. And there it was, the number I needed. It had happened. I had won. But instead of the rush of victory that I had expected, there was only a sickening sense of dread that washed over me. The dealer's smile faltered for just a moment, but he quickly recovered, his cold eyes never leaving mine. "You won," he said, his voice detached, almost emotionless. "But you've lost far more than you think." His words hit me like a punch to the gut,
and I staggered back, trying to make sense of what he meant. The victory I had fought so hard for suddenly felt hollow, meaningless. The weight of his words pressed down on me, and I realized in that instant that there was something far worse than losing. Winning this game had cost me more than I could ever comprehend.
Before I could respond, the room began to shift. The walls seemed to close in around me, the air growing thick and oppressive. The floor beneath me trembled, and I felt the ground start to tilt, as though the very building was moving. Panic surged through me, but my legs were frozen, unable to move. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I was paralyzed, trapped in the grip of something far greater than my own fear. The floor gave way beneath me, and I felt myself falling deeper into the darkness. My stomach lurched as the sensation of free fall consumed me, and I reached out instinctively, trying to grab onto something, anything, to stop my descent. But there was nothing to hold on to. I was falling through the void, swallowed by the blackness. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come. My lungs burned, and I could feel the pressure building in my chest, but there was no air to breathe. I was falling, and I couldn't stop it. The darkness stretched out before me, an endless void that seemed to go on forever. I couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything, except the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. And then in the distance, I heard it, the dealer's voice, low and mocking, echoing through the darkness. You won, but you're mine now, forever. The words hit me like a blow, and I understood. In that moment, I knew that I had never truly won. The game wasn't about victory or defeat. It was about the price you were willing to pay. And I had paid it, more than I could ever have imagined. The ground rushed up to meet me, and I braced for impact, but it never came. I didn't hit the floor. I didn't hit anything. I simply kept falling deeper into the dark abyss. The feeling of weightlessness consumed me, and I could feel myself slipping away. The pain, the fear, the confusion, they all faded, replaced by an overwhelming numbness. I was lost to the game, lost to whatever world this was. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The darkness vanished, and I was standing, though I didn't know where. The air was cold, biting at me. I felt the weight of his words settle on me like a shroud. There was no escape, no way out. The game had claimed me, and there was nothing I could do to break free. I had won, but in doing so, I had lost everything that mattered. My soul, my freedom, my very existence gone. The devil's game wasn't a game of chance. It wasn't about luck or skill. It was about sacrifice, about surrendering everything you had to a force greater than yourself. And once you made the deal, there was no turning back. I had thought that winning would set me free, but instead it had trapped me in a fate worse than I could have ever imagined. I was lost in the forgotten corners of Vegas, a place where the rules of the world didn't apply, where the game took everything, and the dealer always won.
The story of The Devil's Game isn't just about a cursed casino in Vegas. It's about how, once you make a deal with the devil, there's no turning back. The forgotten corners of this city hold secrets that are far more terrifying than you can imagine. Will you be next to play? Only time will tell.